Quick, name three players on the 1938 New York Football Giants. Well, they had Hall of Famers Mel Hein and Tuffy Leemans, but they're still an overlooked team despite winning the NFL championship that year. We're going to break down that 1938 Giants season with never before seen video and expert analysis on this episode of Sports Rewind. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Sports Rewind, where we take a fresh look at the old. If it's overlooked or misunderstood in sports history, we're going to talk about it. I'm your host, Ken Tomash. Today, we're going to rewind to 1938 for a look at a National Football League team that really deserves more recognition. First, though, let's take a quick look back at what was happening in the world that year. I'm not going to lie to you, folks. 1938 was pretty grim. Europe moved closer to war as the Third Reich expanded its territory. Nazi troops moved into Austria in March. Germany annexed the country as part of Adolf Hitler's plans for domination. Back in the U.S., the Great Depression worsened after a brief recovery. A sharp downturn starting in mid-1937 pushed American unemployment to 19%. Action Comics #1 hit newsstands, brought with it a new hero. Superman made his debut that April, ushering in America's obsession with superheroes. On the way out, though, the Buffalo nickel, the last one of its kind, was struck in April 1938, with the Jefferson nickel replacing it that November. And if you brushed your teeth this morning, you probably used one of these, a toothbrush with bristles that were the very first ones to be made with a new invention, nylon. All right, to the world of sports, which soldiered on. Tim Mara and two partners acquired an NFL franchise for New York City in 1925 for $500. It's about $9,000 today. They won the league title in 1927, finished second to Green Bay in 1929 and 1930, and played in the first three postseason NFL championship games after the league split into Eastern and Western divisions in 1933. Now, by 1938, the Giants were coming off two subpar seasons, but that would change, thanks in large part to one of the best defenses in NFL history. Our guest today will give us insight into that season and that team as we go through the use of video that you may probably have never seen before, and we'll see why that team was so good yet so underappreciated. They're both members of the Professional Football Researchers Association, as am I. Larry Schmitt is a Big Blue interactive historian and source for all things about Giant history. And Mike Moran is a football historian and author whose father, Hap, actually played in the early NFL for the Giants from 1928 to 1933, part of his 8-year career in the league. Gentlemen, welcome to Sports Rewind.
Thanks for having me, Ken.
Now, Michael, we'll start with you. What was pro football as a game and the NFL as a league morphing into from what it had been in the 1920s and kind of its rudimentary beginnings?
You know, one of the things that was happening at this point was that they were getting into the bigger cities. So when my father broke into the league in 1926, it was just a neighborhood in Philadelphia that sponsored the team, the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, and they won the NFL championship that year. So in the 30s, there was a concerted effort to get publicity out and move into the bigger markets. And of course, getting the Giants in New York City was a major, milestone in that regard, because football was doing better in towns that didn't have a lot of collegiate football, which was much more popular than pro football. And New York City had, it had NYU, it had Fordham, and then Notre Dame was coming into town regularly to play. So that was part of it, was that they were starting to break into the bigger markets. I think another part of it was that they began to emphasize league play. If you look at the early NFL, they would play anybody. My father, when he was playing for Frankfurt, they played every Saturday and every Sunday, and they played teams from the Anthracite League, from different semi-pro leagues. So it was getting to be a big city, a more defined league, a more defined schedule. And as you mentioned, one of the big things was that they divided the league into two divisions so that they could have a playoff, because the championship had previously just been supposedly based on who had the best winning percentage. But there wasn't even an end of the season in the beginning. And now it's the 100th anniversary of the Pottsville Maroons having the best percentage winning, but being denied the championship for a supposedly violation of territorial rules. So they were trying to get their act together, and it was becoming more professional and probably a little farther separated from the semi-pro leagues around them.
Yeah, and that Frankfurt Yellow Jackets team is a team worthy of its own look, which maybe we'll do at some point. We actually have, thanks to your website, some amazing video of your dad, Hap, playing for the Giants in 1929. Remarkable footage. As rough and tumble as the game was in this era, it's amazing that anybody was able to play for 8 years, and especially, like you were saying, playing on Saturdays and Sundays or wherever they could make a buck until the league started to get a little bit more professional and a little bit more structured in terms of its league schedule. Larry, I want to ask you, the Giants had been a good team from the get-go, obviously, but when they hired Steve Owen as head coach in 1931, they really became a consistently good team. What did Owen do that other coaches in that era did not do?
A couple of things. He did pay a very strong focus on defensive play. He was a lineman. He was an all-pro offensive tackle. He played defensive tackle, and he loved football. He understood dominating the line of scrimmage. So the Giants were always known as a very physical team. They were always one of the bigger teams in the league. Of course, then a big player was 225 or 230 pounds, and strong defensive play. And he was ahead of his time as a tactician. He would devise special defenses for opponents. We'll get into it a little bit, defending Sammy Baugh and Don Hudson, who were, players who were ahead of their time and coming up with schemes. And he also emphasized the importance of the kicking game, not only punting and playing field position, but field goal kicking. The Giants had a number of good kickers during his tenure, Ward Cuff and Ken Strong, and they went back and forth during their careers as being the NFL's all-time leading scorers. And, Steve Owen was very content where if the Giants had a 3-0 lead at the half, he would just punt, play defense, and win the field position battle and just run the game out. And the Giants won a lot of close games, and a couple of these games that we'll get to in 1938 were very much what you could call, Steve Owen football.
Now, throughout this episode, we're going to show you what I believe to be never before seen footage of the Giants' 1938 season. It is sourced from a highlight film that is now 86 years old. It's been enhanced some with artificial intelligence, and it starts with some truly remarkable video of training camp. Now, we're used to seeing NFL camp footage this time of year, all through the summer and the preseason, but this is really a rare glimpse into how an NFL team in 1938 prepared for their season. Now, first thing is teams didn't have complexes like they do today. The Giants trained at the Blue Hills Country Club in Orangeburg, New York, 19 miles north of New York City in Rockland County. Later it became the home of Camp Shanks, the largest American embarkation camp in World War II. It's now the site of a different New York football team's training facility. New York City FC of Major League Soccer trains there, and the Netflix show Orange is the New Black was filmed there. Now, the Giants reported to camp August 15th, a little over 3 weeks ahead of their first and only exhibition game against the Eastern All-Stars. And the first thing I noticed, Larry, is how thin everybody is and how low impact what we see here, starting with calisthenics. What was training camp like for these guys in the 30s?
So one of the really important things to remember is that in 1938, the Giants broke up after the season in 1937, and that was it. The players went their own way around the country, and they had off-season jobs. They didn't train. There were no OTAs. There was no conditioning program. There were no mini camps. The players got back together in the summer of 1938, and you can see they're here doing their calisthenics, trying to get back into shape because, who knows what these guys are doing in the off-season. So they're getting back into football shape. And once, after a couple of weeks of conditioning and they started football drills, it was very different than what we're used to, here in the 2000s. The football camps were very, very physical. They were live, full contact. And this year in 1938, the NFL increased the rosters from 25 players in 37 to 30. So this was the Giants' largest attended camp ever. They brought in 44 players. And what Steve Owen did was he split the team into two separate teams. There was Team A and Team B, and they would scrimmage, they would go through their drills and then they would scrimmage against one another. And Steve Owen did this throughout camp, and he would tally the scores. And that was how he decided who he was going to group together for his 2-platoon system during the regular season, which is something he came up with in 1937, where he would have his Team A play the first and third quarters. Team B would play the second and fourth quarters, because the Giants had a very young team. They were the youngest team in the NFL in 1938. They had 21 players with 2 years or less experience, and they had a very, very talented influx of players in 1937, where they got Ward Cuff and a bunch of other players, and that gave Steve Owen the idea midway through 1937 that I can split my players up and they'll be fresh. And the one exception, of course, was Mel Hein. The Team A and Team B were 10 players each. Mel Hein played center, and he played close to 60 minutes for each game, and several times he did play the full 60 minutes.
Now, tell us here, we're seeing a bunch of offensive sets here that may look very unfamiliar to fans of today. Tell us what we're seeing.
So you're seeing single wing football, and, there's this misconception that, Paul Brown, T formation football, it was very Neanderthal. It was just running into a pile, and they were like rugby scrums. There's a lot of deception going on here, a lot of ball handling. The closest thing that you'll see to single wing football, you see the way they're faking and the jump passes. If you watch college football and you watch the service academies, Army, Navy, or Air Force, when they run their triple options, a lot of those concepts come from single wing football. The difference you'll see in the modern college game is they use the balanced line. But a lot of what you see with the faking, and, there's a play coming up here where I think there's 3 laterals and then there's a pass. It was a fast game. You had to think on your feet, and you'll see, often they'll come up to the line in the T formation or the single wing, and then they'll shift into the A formation, which was a Steve Owen formation that he came up with to take advantage of Mel Hein's ability not only to snap the ball to any one of his backs. This is the play with the different fakes. And because in the A formation, the backs were strong to the weak side of the line. In the traditional single wing, double wing Notre Dame box, the backs are always strong to the strong side of the line. But in the A formation, it was reversed. And Mel Hein could snap the ball to the fullback, the halfback, or the tailback. And the splits were very unusual. The left tackle was way off of Hein, and it was because he was so quick out of his stance, and he was strong and he was athletic, and he was also the first center to snap the ball with his head up. He wouldn't look back to where he was snapping the ball. He would be looking at the defense. He would be reading his keys, his assignment, what he had to do after the snap, and then he could snap the ball without looking between his legs to see whether it was going to the halfback or the fullback. So it was very unique, and several teams tried to copy the A formation, but nobody was able to do it because they could only run it because of Mel Hein.
Now, some of these plays you will see come back when we look deeper into the season and look at actual game highlights. But let's talk about Ed Donowski. And here you see what sports medicine was in 1938. Mike, he was a very, very good passer at a time when passing was still coming together. What made Ed Donowski such a good passer in this league at this time?
They called him Bullet Ed. The ball had changed shape in 1933 too. It was made more aerodynamic. It was brought in together. It was smaller around the circumference and a little bit longer, and it made for a better aerodynamic passing ball. But it also changed that change in the ball shape, changed the kicking game as well.
Not only the punting, but as we'll see, place kicking as well. I see everyone in that era was kicking straight on. And goalposts were moved back up to the goal line in 1933. A lot of guys had to be able to kick. And so over the course of time, not only was your kicker obviously playing another position regularly because of limited rosters still, but guys had to be versatile because someone might be in the game and have to kick. And so you had several guys on the roster who would work out and be able to kick. And so they were getting the kicks in on those little small goalposts there. Now, we don't recommend using a teammate's face as a kicking tee, but sometimes the monotony of training camp means that you maybe have to give this a shot. And I love this, not only this, which is fun, but I love, if you see in this next shot, this was a country club, remember? And I swear that those are golfers wandering over to watch the Giants practice. I just found that to be super fascinating. So, I mean, that's just a look. And the filmmakers loved the idea of kicking things through through a ring. I don't know if that was a Steve Owen actual training technique or if that was just something we see here. Now, you mentioned, Mike, that the Giants had to deal with a tragedy during preseason camp, and that was something that affected them throughout the season.
8-year veteran on the Giants and was a tackle. He was on a golf course in Massachusetts and he was struck by lightning and killed. And I think that really, he was a very popular guy. He was an NYU player, and the Giants had quite a few Fordham and NYU players. There was a lot of New York City collegiate football players on the Giants. And that, I know it hit the Giants very tough. I mean, I remember my father talking extensively about Len Grant. I think it really made an impression, not just on the Giants who were playing them, but everyone who knew the man.
The Giants beat a team of graduated Eastern All-Stars at the Polo Grounds on Wednesday night, September 7th. The charity game drew 40,000 fans as the Giants won 6-0 on 2 Ward Cup field goals. They would open the season 4 days later in Pittsburgh. And here's why. That game was originally supposed to be played on September 18th, but because the baseball Pirates were in the hunt for the National League pennant that year, that meant potential World Series games in Pittsburgh. And the baseball team owners said no more football games at Forbes Field after September 11th. So they hastily redid the NFL schedule, and the football Pirates opened Friday night in Detroit. Remember, they would not become the Steelers for another couple of years. So they played Friday night in Detroit, came home to play the Giants 2 days later on the Sunday. It was crazy. So the Giants ended up with 2 road games to start the season, but with a week in between. Then as you look at their schedule here, the first half of the schedule, they would host Pittsburgh, travel to Washington, and then host the Eagles and the Dodgers back-to-back weeks at the Polo Grounds. So let's go now to Forbes Field for the opener of the season for the Giants. Obviously, the Pirates had played 2 nights before, September 11th, 1938. This is rookie running back Byron Whizzer White, who'd signed for $15,000. Look at those pants. Here he sweeps around right in, doesn't get a lot, but he did have 175 all-purpose yards. Pirates 7-6 after 1. Second quarter, Pittsburgh quarterback Frank Filchok, number 55, all Big Ten from Indiana, finds his man Edgar Eggs Mansky for a 22-yard score, 14-13 Bucks. Ed Danowski's 2 touchdown passes put the Giants up 20-14 at the half. Here he flips a little shovel pass to Chuck Galatka in the 4th for 7 yards. Then it's Danowski again, this time with the pass into the left flat. We saw it in training camp. Leland Schaefer, an 18-yard play down to the 1-yard line. Danowski 7 of 9 passing for 81 yards. Hank Soar goes in for the score that iced it, 27-14, the final. All right, so great start for the Giants. They opened up with a win, but the next 2 weeks did not go well for them. After the off week, because of the schedule being rearranged, the Giants went to Philadelphia and lost 14-10 after losing 10-7 in the 4th. In that game, the Eagles returned 2 fumbles for 88 and 92-yard touchdowns on the same game. The next week, the Pirates got revenge. They came to the Polo Grounds and beat the Giants 13-10. That game featured a brawl that started when Larry Johnson of the Giants punched Armand Nikolai of the Pirates after Pittsburgh had scored to go ahead in the 4th. Pittsburgh played them tough. That was only the second time in 11 meetings, though, that the Pittsburgh Pirates had beaten the New York Giants. So the Giants were 1-2, heading to D.C. to play the Redskins and Sammy Baugh. Larry, this rivalry with Washington that had been going on since the Redskins were in Boston. Tell us about this. The Giants had won 6 of the 8 meetings against George Preston Marshall's team while they were in Boston. But then he moved him to DC in 1937. They beat the Giants twice and kept them out of the title game. What was this rivalry like?
This was the rivalry that made the Giants as a franchise, and it was such a boon for the NFL. Going back to the 1920s, we'd always had the Bears and Packers banging on each other, and they, were very, usually in the top of the league. And the Giants, they tried to get a rivalry going. That the Staten Island Stapletons were there for a little while. The Brooklyn Dodgers were in town, but they were up and down. They weren't very good most of the time. They were pretty good in 1938. In 1936, it was the Redskins' final year in Boston, and they had a good team. They came to the Polo Grounds, and they beat the Giants on the last day of the season, and they won the East, and they were going to play the Packers, but they struggled in Boston for attention. Their attendance is always poor, and George Preston Marshall had enough, and he said, we're not leaving New York. We're going to host the NFL championship game here in New York in the Polo Grounds. We're not going back to Boston. They don't appreciate us. They don't deserve us. The Packers beat them, and then they moved to Washington. And then the two things that happened was being in Washington, it was a rabid football community. They just flocked to the Redskins. And then they also got Sammy Baugh, the rookie, sensational passer. He led the NFL in passing, and he just dazzled people. He was all over the highlight films, the newsreels in the theaters, and they beat the Giants twice, including the final game of the season in 1937. They came to New York, and George Preston Marshall brought like 10,000 fans from Washington on the Amtrak up to New York. He brought the Redskins marching band, and they marched up 7th Avenue from Penn Station, and this huge ruckus, and the newspaper men were out taking photos, and this whole spectacle. And then they, whipped the Giants' rear end really badly, and then they beat the Bears in Wrigley Field for the title. So in 1938, the Redskins were big favorites. Many people expected them to repeat as champions. The Giants were 1-2 going into Washington. They were okay, but they weren't great. They fumbled that game away in Philadelphia. So the Giants went down to Washington, and they had some payback on their minds.
Let's go to Griffith Stadium now. On October 9th, 1938, 35,000 turned out for this one. Biggest since the move from Boston. The defending NFL champs were 2-0-1 on the season, but it was Sammy Baugh and company who were uptight. Very first play from scrimmage, Max Krause, a former Giant, fumbled. New York's Will Walls recovered on the Washington 26. That led to this. Ward Cuffs, 17 yards, straight on field goal, 3-0 Giants. Second quarter, Ed Danowski, we told you he could punt. He booms this one, and Washington's Andy Farkas, easy to spot because he's playing without a helmet. This happened before the 1944 rule change that made it mandatory. He makes a nice return along the sideline. Farkas was their first draft pick. He could run, he could return, he could catch a bit too. Baugh, back after missing 3 weeks with a bad shoulder, hits him for 7 here as the Redskins went on a drive. Again, they go to Farkas, and the rookie gets a nice gain up the middle. And check out the gang tackling as Farkas just refuses to go down. Finally, they force him out of bounds and to the ground. He ran for 33 yards on 8 carries. Then from the 40, Baugh with a little play action pass to Farkas, hits another rookie, Bob Masterson from Miami. Nice over-the-shoulder grab and the touchdown. Washington led the Giants 7-3 at halftime. You can see the size of the crowd for this one. Not only were they actually on the field, not a seat was empty at Griffith Stadium. Neither team scored in the third. In the fourth, Danowski finds Jim Poole over the middle, 32 yards down to the 38. You can see no helmet. Andy Farkas gets in on the tackle. Danowski, 11 of 21 on the day. Remember, this was a season where the whole league completed 41% of its passes. That's Hank Soar with a 7-yard catch. And finally, the game winner, Danowski to Jim Lee Howell, a future coach of the Giants, back of the end zone, 18 yards. And Sammy Baugh was intercepted on the Redskins' final drive, and the Giants won it 10-7 to go to 2-2 on the year. So let's take a look now, gentlemen, at the NFL standings as of October 10th after this game. Strangely enough, that loss dropped Washington out of first place, sole possession of first place, rather. And with Brooklyn beating Pittsburgh, the Dodgers shared the top spot. And again, at this point in NFL history, ties were not figured in winning percentage. The Giants win got them to within a half game of the top spot, but so were the Eagles. And Pittsburgh, with their compressed schedule, had already played 6 games by this point. They were in the basement at 2-4. but one of those two was against the Giants. Let's take a look at the West at this point in the season. The Bears at 3-1 were leading the Western Division. They were a half game up on the 2-1 Lions and the 3-2 Packers. The Rams were 2-3, and the Cardinals were 1-4. So a rematch loomed with the Eagles on October 16th at the Polo Grounds, followed by a visit from Brooklyn. This part of the schedule, these first 6 games were all against Eastern Division clubs. Playing a team from the other division was something that happened, but definitely not as often as you played the teams in your own division. So the October 16th game stayed true to form. The Giants scored twice in the second quarter and held on to win 17-7 in a game that featured 9 turnovers. Bull Carsus returned one of those, an Eagle fumble for 76 yards for a score. Then on October 23rd, the Brooklyn Dodgers made the trip to the Polo Grounds, having never beaten the Giants, though they had tied them 10-10 in 1936 and 13-13 in 1937. New York had won the other 10 meetings. So let us go now to the Polo Grounds. It had been 3 weeks since the baseball Giants had played their final game of the season, but you could still see the infield dirt at the Polo Grounds as this one kicked off. 36,000 fans there. All Giants first half. First quarter scoreless. You knew Ed Danowski could pass, but here he shows his ability to run, taking off for 12 yards, set the Giants up in Dodger territory. Then Danowski to Jim Lee Howell. We saw him in the last game, 32 yards, and the score falls backward into the end zone, 7-0 Giants. Take a look at this one again. Danowski, very accurate, gets this one right where it has to go, over and between the defenders. Only he could get it. Great catch, touchdown. Second quarter, it is Danowski again, this time with another nice gain running the football before he's shouldered out of bounds by Clarence Ace Parker, probably the best player on the Dodgers. Then Danowski floats one to Ward Cuff. There's another play we saw in the preseason. Cuff is stopped just short of the goal line by Ace Parker. Today, this would be replayed endlessly. Did the ball break the plane? We've only got one angle of this. Let's go to commercial, come back. They'd still be talking about it. He was ruled just short. Bull Carsus took it in from there on the right side. The score, Cuff's extra point made it 14-0. Now, here's where we're going to see one of these plays from training camp in action in the game. Shifting from the A, Len Barnum hits Tuffy Leemans, good for 45 yards. Ace Parker gives chase again, finally takes him down 5 yards from the goal line. Then showing his versatility, Leemans throws to the back of the end zone. Ray Hankin makes the scoring grab. That made it 28-0 at the half. Dodgers made a valiant effort to come back, but still, it was the Giants who won this one 28-14. Larry, we saw the A formation in action in the preseason. We saw it there. Why was it so effective at this point in history? And as you said, only the Giants were able to really pull this off.
It was new. Owen only debuted it in the middle of the 1937 season, and it was something he had concocted to try to compete with the Redskins because, Sammy Baugh, and they were just piling up points. And, as good as the Giants' defense was, he wasn't sure if he could, contain them. So he needed to add a little offensive flair, some pop to the Giants' offense. And it was an asymmetrical formation, the back strong to one side, the line strong to the other, the unusual line splits. And, you had Mel Hein, this huge, for his era, he was 225, but he was tall, he was 6'2", and he was very athletic. He was the only player in the NFL who was big and strong enough to tackle Bronco Nagurski one-on-one. And as a linebacker on defense, he could also cover Don Hudson downfield, the Jerry Rice of his day. Fast player, and, Hines, dropping huge fullbacks and covering receivers. He's the reason the A worked.
So after a 3-game winning streak, the Giants were 4-2, all against Eastern clubs. 4 of the final 5 games were scheduled for the Polo Grounds. Scheduling at this point in NFL history, not completely even, but after another off week on Halloween weekend, here is how the standings looked as of the 1st of November. Having played 2 ties, Washington was on top, a half game ahead of the Giants, who had that game in hand. All right, let's talk about the Western Division standings at this point. Talk about this odd schedules. By this point, the Packers had already played 8 games. They were on top at 6-2. Detroit's 4-2 record had them good for second place. A game back. The Bears were lurking as well. When we talk about things that were going on in the rest of the world, the standings, as you look here this morning's the morning paper, what had happened the night before, Orson Welles' radio drama War of the Worlds had happened the night before, which caused no lack of consternation among the populace. So here's where the Giants defense really asserted itself. So they had held the Redskins and Eagles to a touchdown each. They'd shut out the Dodgers for 3 quarters, and the Cardinals and Rams both left the Polo Grounds having been shut out. Tuffy Leemans' fourth quarter run was the only score of a 6-0 win over the Cardinals. And then the Giants ran for 227 yards as a team in a 28-0 blowout of the Rams for their 5th straight win, with the Packers coming to town for a big, huge matchup on November the 20th. Now, you are watching Sports Rewind, where we take a fresh look at the old in the world of sports. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, give us a like, subscribe, leave a comment below. I'm Ken Tomash. I'm your host, and we're joined by historians Larry Schmitt of Big Blue Interactive and Mike Moran. Mike, the Packers actually predate the NFL itself, as do the Bears and the Cardinals. The Giants joined the league in 1925, but they didn't play the Packers right away. And the first 17 meetings were pretty close. The Packers won 9 of those games. The Giants won 7. Larry talked about the Redskin-Giant rivalry really making the league at that point, but predating that, what was the Giant-Packer rivalry like?
3 years in a row, they were it was nip and tuck between the Giants and the Packers. I think after that, the big rivalry below became the Giants and the Bears. And then you get into these later 30s championships, and it's the Packers again. My dad, the 1930 game, he set a record for the longest run from scrimmage for the NFL. And his favorite story was that Johnny Blood McNally in the Hall of Fame was playing for the Packers then, and they'd been teammates and friends in Pottsville in 1928. And when my father was recounting this story to the Giants video crew, he had a big chuckle that as he ran down the field on a fake punt for this 91-yard run, he passed McNally 3 times, got around him 3 times. So I think my father's mind, the Packers were the team to beat in the 1930s.
Definitely a great rivalry. And as they came to the Polo Grounds for this game, more than 48,000 fans in the depth of the depression came out to watch this one. Biggest crowd in the league to that point at the Polo Grounds. Second half kickoff, Clark Hinkle fumbles, picks it up, goes back into the end zone. Even in 1938, that was a safety if you put the ball in the end zone yourself and you're tackled there. 2-0 Giants. Nice ground level look here. You see the stands at the Polo Ground as Hank Bruder takes a Cecil Isbell pass for 13 yards down to the 11-yard line. And that set up Tiny Engerbreston's 22-yard field goal. His holder also not wearing a helmet. Now, Tuffy Leemans had the only 100-yard rushing day by a Giant that season with a club record 159 yards. That mark stood for 5 years. He gets 75 of that total on this one in the third. And I'm obsessed with Ed Whitsett, the left tackle, who kept up with him for so much of that run. 9-3 Giants at this point. But the Packers were on the move when the Giant defense rose up again. Isbell's throw to the left, picked off by Mel Hein. He went 50 yards for the only touchdown of his brilliant career. Larry talked about how fast Hein was. He certainly was. That iced it. 15-3 New York, the final. As you see here, you'll see Hein leaping super high to get up in the air and make the grab and take this one the rest of the way. So we've talked a little bit, gentlemen, about exactly how good and why Mel Hein was so great. You know, he had speed, he had strength, he was big for his time. People today don't understand how a center could be the most valuable player of the league, but certainly for everything that he did on both sides of the ball, he had to be the MVP.
You know, the one thing I love about the highlights from this game is you see, you know, we talked earlier about big players for that era. You know, the linemen were 225, 230. The key to being a valuable player during the single platoon era is versatility and endurance, because these guys played offense and defense and special teams. There were no breaks to the bench, and the linemen, they needed to move, they needed to run. And you saw on the Tuffy Leemans, you know, he was an all-pro back, he's in the Hall of Fame. Left tackle Ed Whitsett keeps up with him most of that run. And then you have Mel Hein making this acrobatic play. He leaps, he grabs the ball, and then he outruns the Packers. He was, you know, even the Giants were trailing. He was the first guy in the end zone. It's just, you know, it's brilliant how these players could do so many things so well. And it's, today football is it's a sport of specialization. Guys shuttle in, shuttle out. They only do one thing. You have run stoppers, you have pass rushers, you have coverage guys, you have third down backs. In 1938, you need to be good at a lot of things. Ed Danowski, we saw him, launch a beautiful punt. He could throw. He also ran the ball. He was in the Giants' top 3 in rushing that year behind Hank Soar and Tuffy Williams. You needed to be good at a lot of things.
Especially with short rosters for the time. I mean, 30 was still half of what people have today, a little bit more than half. And those limited substitution rules that we talked about. So that win got the Giants to 7-2. It looked like the East was theirs, but then on Thanksgiving, the Brooklyn Dodgers threw a monkey wrench into the proceedings. Now, we all know Detroit traditionally hosts a Thanksgiving Day game, and they have for many, many years. Dallas came along later on and hosted one. But Brooklyn also hosted a game on the holiday every year from 1932 to 1938. And the odd thing about this game is that a huge snowstorm hit the East Coast that day, November 24th. It killed 44 people on the East Coast. But the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade went on, as did the football game, and the Dodgers nearly won. Brooklyn led 7-0 until the fourth, until a Danowski touchdown pass with under 2 minutes to play got them into a tie. And the other big football game that day, Sid Luckman's final game for Columbia, was a loss at Brown. After that, he said, I'm not really likely to play professional football. Of course he did, and the league and everybody was much better for it. So we'll look at these standings after those 2 Thanksgiving Day games. You can see here how the Giants blew the chance to win the division, because a win would have put them at 8-2 with 1 game left, while Washington would only have been able to get to 7-2 at best. Again, ties not figured in that calculation. The Redskins did beat the Pirates on that weekend to get to 6-2 and setting up a winner-take-all game for the East title on December 4th. Now, guys, I'll ask you, what was a big game back in the 30s? I mean, we're here in the Depression, and yet we keep seeing these huge crowds come out. Does this really mean that pro football was really coming of age and really taking a step ahead of the college game, which for years was seen as the code of football?
It was gradual, but there was an increase in football. You can tell by the media coverage. The newspaper coverage got much better, especially in New York. New York didn't cover football quite as well as some of the papers from the Midwest. But you could see through the 30s, pro football was ascending in public interest. At the time, during the Depression, a lot of colleges, they de-emphasized football. And also Major League Baseball did not do as well as football. They stayed flat. Some markets declined a little bit, but it's very interesting when you look back. The Depression, and then a few years later with World War II, that really, really helped professional football a lot. They grew. The public realized they could rely on professional football. And then after the war ended, you had the All-America Conference, and football just exploded, and that's what really brought us the modern game.
So we talked about, big crowds coming in, and how a couple of weeks prior to this, we'd had the biggest crowd of the season, but the biggest was still yet to come on that day, December 4th, winner take all for the East title. More than 12,000 fans came from Washington. That swelled the crowd to 58,000 plus, largest at the Polo Grounds since Red Grange had played there in 1925. 10 takeaways for the Giants in this one, still a team record, tied twice. Here's Ward Cuff picking off Baugh. His 32-yard return put the Giants in good position. Baugh threw 3 interceptions on the day. They didn't wait long to cash in at all. Very first offensive play, Hank Soar gets a key block from Mel Hein, goes 43 yards for the touchdown, 7-0 New York. Remember Frank Filchock from the first game of the season against Pittsburgh? Well, he wound up on Washington, and here, subbing in for Baugh, he goes 19 yards on a keeper in the third quarter, but by that time it was 17-0 Giants, and it would get worse from here. Here, Filchock's pass batted up in the air, out of frame. It winds up in the arms of that man again, Ward Cuff. He gets some great blocks and some nifty footwork. He goes all the way 96 yards for the score. That was the Giants' record for an interception until 1961. That made it 24-0. Fourth quarter now. You're going to look at a young man named Kink Richards. No kink shaming here. He makes a nice gain, but he's going to pay for it. Sammy Baugh tries to tackle him about the head and neck, and then Hal Bradley does get in a punch during the tackle. was a rough game in the 30s, folks. The Redskins got more aggressive as the score got further out of hand. Bull Karsus gets tackled around the head by Hank Bartos and Max Krause. Bradley gets in a late hit. No matter, the Giants kept doing what they do. Tuffy Leemans with a 28-yard touchdown pass to Chuck Galatka. Galatka returned an interception for the final score, and it ended up 36-0. No doubt about this one at all. So at this point, guys, the Giants are cooking with gas. They're going into they hadn't lost in 2 months. They'd allowed 10 points in the last 5 games. And as we take a look now at the final standings in the league in the East, they wind up a game and a half ahead of Washington. The amazing stat, gave up just 79 points all year. That is only 4 teams in the divisional era ever allowed fewer points per game than the Giants did in this season. In the West, Green Bay scored even more points, but they gave up more as well to finish 8-3 ahead of Detroit. So stats-wise, these teams were evenly matched. The NFL championship game was set for December 11th, 1938 at the Polo Grounds, and it was rated actually as a toss-up by the odds makers. So I'm going to ask each of you, start with you, Mike. If you were looking at this matchup before it was played, what would you be looking at, and what would your prediction for this game have been?
You know, I think the first thing I'd be looking at is the weather. So many games were we get to the end of the year, and the weather played such a big part in it. And is it going to be a good day that's good for passing, a day that's good for running? And I think I'm looking at, well, from a Giants point of view, I'd be looking at how are we covering on defense. That's going to be our, that's going to be our strong suit. And we can't let them score that much.
Larry, in the earlier game against Green Bay, we didn't see Don Hutson. That's a name you should have seen a lot in this period for the Packers. We didn't see that, but still a dangerous guy that every team had to pay attention to. As you looked at the matchup on paper, 2 very evenly matched teams, it's easy to see why it was rated as a toss-up. But with the Giants on such a hot streak, was there any doubt maybe in Giants fans' minds that they would win this one?
Yes, there was. And very importantly, when Green Bay played the Giants a couple of weeks earlier, when Hein had the interception, that was their final game of the season. Their schedule was different from the rest of the NFL because of the weather in Wisconsin. Their schedule was always front-loaded with home games in Green Bay, and then the back end of the schedule, they would play on the road. They were able to do that because they were the only NFL team that didn't share a stadium with the baseball team. The Giants had to share the stadium with the baseball Giants. So they would always open the season on the road. We talked about how the Pittsburgh football Pirates had to make accommodations for the baseball team. Green Bay didn't have that problem. So they were happy to play at home early in the year when the weather was nice, and then they'd finish the year on the road. So they had 2 weeks off. The Giants played the Dodgers on Thanksgiving. That was a rough game. And then you saw the physicality and the extracurriculars with that game against the Redskins, and the Giants were banged up. They had a number of players, including Ward Cuff, a key guy who didn't practice at all during the week. The Giants had bumps and bruises. And the Packers, 2 weeks rest, with the exception of Don Hutson, they were healthy. The week before the first game at the Polo Grounds, Don Hutson had injured his knee. So he was limited in that game, and you'll see in the championship game, he was in and out of the lineup. He ended up being a decoy for most of the game. The Giants were a defensive team. They were a running team. They played the kicking game. The Packers led the league in scoring. They like to throw the ball and make big plays. So that was the handicap. And like as Mike said, with the weather, there were stories in the week leading up to the game. There was some weather in New York, and they kept a tarp on the Polo Grounds field to make sure that it was in good shape for the championship game on Sunday.
We talked about sports medicine not being particularly advanced. I mean, they did the best they could, but groundskeeping was another thing too, where today we take it for granted that an NFL game is going to be played on a very good surface most of the time. Chicago late in the season notwithstanding. But back then it was kind of do the best you can, and both teams had to live with the conditions. That's why we had the sneaker game and everything else. So there was a real good chance that the conditions on the field might not be really conducive to one or the other team. You got to take what you got. All right, let us go now to the title game at the Polo Grounds. And no 12,000 Washington fans this time, but 48,000 plus. The largest title game crowd to that point came to see Curly Lambeau's Packers against Steve Owen's Giants. Tuffy Leemans, 15 yards up the middle on a first quarter drive with the Giants leading 3-0. From there, it's Leemans again, starting to sweep left, cutting back inside and going in for the score. Kick was no good, 9-0 New York after one. Second quarter, Leemans has this pass tipped and intercepted by Tiny Engerbreston out of bounds on the Packer 49. Now here's a formation we haven't seen yet, but we have talked about it. The Notre Dame box. You'll notice this here as Arnie Herber hits Carl Mullineau 40 yards, 9-7 Giants, right between the goalposts. Later, the Packers were driving, but a bad snap ends up in the hands of Mel Hein at midfield. The Giants took over, and here comes a bit of controversy. Check out the formation. 3 backs in front of Tuffy Leemans, line up to the left. Leemans hits Len Barnum. This is going to be ruled a catch and a fumble out of bounds at the 20. This is another one for replay that would not come in for another 50 years. Clark Hinkle protested to no avail. We only have the one angle on this, but we'll take a look at it again. Larry, what do you think on this play?
Well, we only have the one angle, and it's from high up. It's kind of grainy. It looks to me that it was a catch 2 feet down, and then the ball is stripped. I personally think that's a good call. It looked like a catch and a fumble out of bounds, and the Packers obviously disagreed. But we had no camera on the other side of the field. We didn't have different angles, so the call has to stand.
Danowski play fakes to Hank Soar, finds Charles Bernard for a 21-yard score. It's 16-7 Giants. We saw the jump pass earlier in the season. Here is Cecil Isbell executing it perfectly to Dick Weisgerber. He gets to the outside. He's finally brought down and out of bounds by Hank Soar. Paul Miller of the Packers with a nasty cut block on Mel Hein after the whistle. The Packers are driving. Then here's that Notre Dame box formation again. Packer ends split just a little bit off the line. Backs to the right, backs to the left, balanced formation. And it's Isbell off the misdirection, and he gets an 8-yard gain. Again, quarterbacks had to be very versatile in this period. Clark Hinkle now scores from the 1, and it's 16-14 New York at the half. Field goal gave Green Bay the lead 17-16 in the third, but then it's the Hank Soar show. Danowski hits Soar over the middle for 9. Then Soar with a pass attempt, but it is batted down at the line. No problem. They go back to Danowski, and he looks, and he'll find Soar again for 9 more yards. The passing game really clicking for the Giants on this day. Clutch grabs here by Soar, and then from the Packer 23, this is the play that won the championship. Danowski to Soar in traffic for what turned out to be the game winner. Take a look again. You look at this. The defenders are all around Hank Soar, but Danowski gets the ball right in there, right where it has to go again, proving his accuracy. The Giants win it 23-17, their second championship of the divisional era in front of a huge crowd and what was definitely one of the great NFL championship games. But guys, the thing is, this film was 86 years old, and that was in the third quarter. So there was a lot more game to be played yet before this one was wrapped up. Larry, tell us what happened the rest of the way.
So after the Giants went ahead, the Giants were banged up. This was another rough game, and Steve Owen scrapped his 2-platoon system. He just played his healthiest 11 players the rest of the game. Hank Soar played for Ed Danowski. He ran the offense, and Steve Owen told him, just call your number, play your plays, run your best play. The Packers dominated possession, first downs, yards. The Packers had, I believe, 3 or 4 possessions in the fourth quarter. 3 of them ended up in Giants territory. One was an interception. One was a lost fumble. And on the last time the Packers had the ball, they tried a hook and lateral play that almost worked. There was a lateral to Don Hudson around midfield, and Hank Soar, he caught the winning touchdown pass. He made a game-saving tackle. All the newspaper accounts said that Soar caught him from behind when Hudson had a pass to the end zone. He dragged him down at the 40-yard line, and then the final play of the game was a bomb into the end zone that the Giants knocked down for an incomplete pass. And it was a thrilling game, and it's it's a shame we don't have more film of it. But all the newspaper accounts, they talked about the ferocity of the game, the hard hitting, and also the excitement and these big plays and these exciting stands that the Giants defense made in the fourth quarter to hold on to that 6-point lead.
Yeah, I wish we had more, but I think it's amazing that we have what we have, because I'd never seen this batch of film before, and so to be able to kind of bring it a little bit more to life with a little bit of AI was really helpful. Now, the Packers outgained the Giants, as you mentioned, 378 total yards to 212, but New York won the turnover battle, recovering 2 Packer fumbles. Why do you think now? Obviously, when we talk about great defenses of NFL history, the names that always come up are the 85 Bears and the 2000 Baltimore Ravens. Why do you think this Giant team doesn't get enough recognition? Not that I think everybody should be talking about what happened in the 30s all the time, but the premise of this episode is that this Giants team does not get nearly enough recognition. Why do you think that is?
I think part of it is they didn't really have a flashy player who grabbed attention like Sammy Baugh or Don Hudson or Red Grange, right? Their best player was Mel Hein, their center, and he was also a fantastic defensive player. Offensively with the 2 platoon system, the Giants players weren't able to ascend and, lead the league in many categories. Like Ed Danowski led the league in passing percentage, but, Sammy Baugh led it in yards and touchdowns. Tuffy Leemans led the NFL his rookie year in rushing, 1936, because he played the whole game. 1937 and going forward, it's 2 platoon. So he had half the carries, half the attempts, half the yards, half the touchdowns. So I think, that may have hurt them a little bit. Steve Owen believed in team and, everybody contributes, everybody plays. So you sacrifice personal statistics and by extension, some recognition.
And 2 Hall of Famers is a little low for a championship team, don't you think?
I do. I think, Ed Danowski, had he been a full-time passer, he had more completions, more yards, more touchdowns. I think he would certainly warrant consideration. One guy who I think should, regardless, is Ward Cuff. He was a fantastic player. The first half of his career, he was mostly a blocking back. Later on in the 40s, he handled the ball much more. He led the Giants, I think, in receiving a year or 2 and rushing. And he was always a very good kicker. I mentioned earlier how he and Ken Strong, another Giant, went back and forth being the NFL's all-time leading scorers. They were always one or both near or at the top of the NFL in field goals made. And he certainly, I think, the Veterans Committee maybe could take a look at Ward Cuff. The Giants retired his number. So, they certainly thought he was a very special player and very worthy.
Mike, do you see anybody on this Giants team who you think potentially could be a Hall of Famer who's not, to join Tuffy Leemans and Mel Hein?
But I have a book from the 50s that talks about Giants that should be in the Hall of Fame. And people just before the Hall of Fame existed, they have Dale Burnett in there. They have Ward Cuff. They have Danowski and Len Yountz. And Strong, but of course Strong went with them in 38. So there was, the Hall of Fame has not been that great to the players before NFL films.
That's true. That's a very good point. And Danowski would be a tough sell for modern fans just because they don't really understand the versatility in those days. Guys, as we take a look now at the Giants, how should we remember the 1938 New York Giants? Larry, we'll start with you.
They were a gritty team that willed themselves to win. Some of the games, the game in Brooklyn, that was a tie. That was almost a loss. They scored the winning touchdown with under 2 minutes left. And, it's very possible if they lose there instead of tie that the Redskins could have won the division. The same thing with the Cardinals game earlier in the year. In tough spots, in pressure situations, more often than not, they came through. They threw away that sloppy game in Philadelphia earlier in the year, but as the year went on, it seemed like they got better and better. They were underdogs both times they played the Packers, and they gritted their way to tough victories. And, that's really Steve Owen, resourceful and rugged, and you fight. He was a lineman, and the Giants, even their backs, like they played with the lineman's mentality. They were tough and they were gritty, and the Redskins are throwing punches, and the Giants they soldiered through and they willed their ways to a win.
Mike, what do you love about this Giants team?
I have a picture, an old press photo of them getting on the train to go to the training camp, and it could have been. They look like they could have been the cast of the Goodfellas movie. They just are in their street clothes, and they're just like, I don't know. They're working class guys. You know what I mean? They're not elite. I don't know what they did in the off season. You know, plumbers, undertakers. It's a different for them.
So the aftermath of this, in 1939, the Giants won the Eastern Division again, and the Packers won the Western Division again. But this time the game was in Green Bay, and the Packers won that one 27-0. If you know your history, that was not the last time that the Giants would go to Green Bay and get pummeled in a title game. If you don't know your history, that'll be the subject perhaps for a future episode of Sports Rewind. Larry Schmitt, Mike Moran, it's been a pleasure having you as we walk down memory lane. Thanks for lending your expertise to this discussion of why the 1938 New York Giants should be remembered better than they are. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks to all of you for watching this one. Like, subscribe, share, comment, and we'll see you next time. Remember, be kind, rewind.